We're back, and we're a bit rusty. Welcome to the BWI Live Show. I'm Thomas Brian Carr. It is July, and this is the one of like 3, maybe just 2 months where we have the opportunity where there aren't things happening for people to take vacations. So Fitz traded spots with me. We high-fived on the way. He's in Oregon. I'm back. Nate Bauer here, though. He's been here the whole time. He's been holding down the fort. So, Nate, how are you doing? What'd I miss?
Were you in Oregon as well?
Yes. Yes, I was.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's great. What part of Oregon?
Yeah. Well, we started out on the coast, northern Oregon area, and then we spent some time in Portland, which was cool. So yeah, I'd never been.
The text about the falls was about.
Yes. Yeah. I accidentally texted Nate and not my wife about some travel plans that we were trying to make during the trip because he and I had been texting about something else work-related earlier in the day. So I invited Nate to go see the Bridal Veil Falls in Oregon accidentally.
I was in Oregon as a 6-year-old, maybe. I have this like enduring memory of finding $20 at the bottom of a swimming pool. But we saw all the sites that Oregon had. Yeah, well, I mean, $20 in 1989 was like, that was a big deal to a 5-year-old, and my parents let me keep it. Yeah,
that was a big deal to any adult or child in 1989. So we're here to talk about Penn State football, and of course, we have the BWI mailbag coming up at the end of the show. Appreciate everyone being here. As I said before we left, Nate, always a little nervous when we take a week off because I just imagine, like, you know, people are just going to scatter to the wind. But we've got a lot of stuff coming up on the show today. We got some of your questions, which you can drop in the BWI mailbag. Always appreciate everybody who is here on the show, including Willie Wally, who says 10:02. Yes, it was 10:02 when we started because when Nate was ready to go, suddenly he disappeared because we have state college level issues with the internet before almost every single show. But Willie, I appreciate you giving us the grace of having a 2-minute technical delay. I always appreciate people who have that like level of compassion in them. So thank you.
It's always a crap. Honestly, I'm gonna almost certainly not make it through this show. Something is happening.
Literally right there. It happened exactly as we were talking about. So you can see live on air the things that are happening with Nate's Wi-Fi. We're going to get him back with no Fitz. We're flying without a safety net. So let's get into the thing that we talk about here on the show to begin, and that is the Penn State whiteout has been decided. 2024 whiteout game is November 9th against Washington. And when Nate comes back, he's going to tell you all the details about why that happened, why November 9th specifically, why Washington, and the future of the whiteout game in this environment that Penn State has been advocating for a better whiteout game, for a conversation with the powers that be about, hey, let's find the middle ground. Let's not always put Penn State's best games at noon because these things matter. We're also going to go over the entire schedule and give you kind of the details of what happened where with the different themes because there's some other aspects to this that I just find interesting. But we're going to get into all of that now. Nate Bauer rejoining us literally as we talked about the fact that you were going to have some issues with your internet today and then you disappeared mid-sentence. But we're in it. I've explained. I've set everything up. You missed the awesome intro.
Great.
The whiteout game. What are your thoughts about the decision to play it against Washington in November?
Yeah, it's the best of a I have multiple thoughts actually, so get your popcorn out. I think
Nate's got hot takes.
Yeah, hot takes. Look, Ohio State's out, right? You can't do it. It's going to be the noon game on Fox there on November 2nd, and I think that I kind of dropped these hints through the course of those summer interviews that we did. Obviously, T. Frank, you posted a video of Pat Kraft here on the YouTube site, where they made it plain, right, between Kraft and James Franklin, they made it plain that like they want it to be a night game. They want the setting to be at night. And so November 2nd, noon game, absent the apocalypse, right? Like it's not going to be dark at noon for Ohio State when that game is. And Fox and the Big Ten, right? There was not enough pool to change that time slot based on the money and everything that's involved in that relationship. But what they did have was an opportunity to, I think, have some conversations with the Big Ten, have some conversations with CBS and the other broadcast partners, and try to formulate an opportunity to kind of thread the needle, which is what Washington is. Everybody's probably thinking 3:30 is CBS's time slot. It is 3:30. Do you know what time the sun sets on November 9th, 2024, T. Frank?
I do not.
4:50.
So by the time everything actually starts, it'll be pretty much twilight. The fireworks are going to hit different when it's not totally dark, though, Nate.
Maybe, but I think, listen, you got the national runner-up in college football last year. Now, obviously, being realistic about this, that's a program that lost a ton of pieces and has a very challenging schedule before it even gets to Penn State. So, the likelihood of Penn State and Washington having one loss each or unbeaten each is extraordinarily low. But I think it became fairly clear that they did not want to use that experience, that whiteout, right? They're trying not to spend it on Illinois. And that is disrespectful to Illinois. I don't intend it to be, but I think that's just the truth. Is Illinois is probably going to be a night game on NBC or Peacock. That's actually already, I think, been announced that it is trending towards that 7:30 time slot. But being able to work things out, get the Big Ten to kind of advocate at its behest, right? That's a good thing for Penn State. That kind of shows to me an underlying hidden positive for Penn State through all of this, that Pat Kraft has the ability to advocate for Penn State to Tony Petitti and get results, right? Like to actually have to make progress, right? To have a good conversation and get things done to that end.
So you're categorizing this as a win for Penn State and a mile marker of achievement for Pat Kraft, because I think a lot of these things can be kind of ubiquitous, or not ubiquitous. They can be kind of hard to pin down of what is the impact of a quality athletic director. What is the how do you know if they're doing a good job? How do you know if they're getting these things? And the conversation around this with James Franklin and Pat Kraft to us specifically has been about this compromise. And you're seeing this as a compromise, that because it's not at noon, this is a win for Penn State.
Maybe a couple of things. One, getting a time commitment right before the season to be able to have a whiteout game is on the low scale of things that are accomplishments for an athletic director, but it's also a relatively low bar in terms of that influence that Penn State has had over the last decade or so. Kind of kicking and screaming and throwing a little bit of a fight publicly when Pat Kraft took the job over starting so many years on the road, right, for the Big Ten Conference slate. Listen, wins are wins. And to be able to showcase your program with a non-noon start, not on a streamer, right? That's kind of the important element to this is this game not being on Peacock. That's big. That's a win.
I want to dispel another rumor here by asking you the question. The policy of non night games in November for the Big Ten. Is that a thing still? Is that part of the consideration here? Okay.
No, not as far as I know. There was some reporting a few years ago. My understanding is that's not a thing, that if they want to do that, then Penn State can do that. I don't think that it would be the program's preference necessarily to go that late. But yeah, they can do that if they want. And there is a possibility, even in the CBS time slot, that this game could be an evening kick as well. To read more about that, go to the premium article that I had yesterday. There it is.
Subscribe, baby. Code PSU1, 2 months for $1. If you're checking out the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, this is how it is exclusively for you. You can read Nate's article that he posted just before the show. Use promo code PSU1, 2 months for $1. That firmly gets you into the regular season for college football, gets you into our breakdown of games, our preview of games, our insight into James Franklin press conferences, our insight into practice, where you get that premium content of, hey, this is what we see, our unvarnished observations about what's going on at Penn State practice, all that stuff. Code PSU1, and it kicks off right now with Nate's observations about the whiteout game and how all of this came together. The date, I know we've mentioned this a little bit before. In November. Ohio State was in November, so even if they use the Ohio State game, it's still going to be a November whiteout game. Do you have any expectations or reservations then about the efficacy of the whiteout that late in the year? Are there that many white North Face jackets in circulation that it's going to be successful?
I don't think it matters, honestly. Enough people will try, right? You're always going to have a pocket, one or two people here or there that are wearing blue or whatever, don't get the memo or don't want to get the memo. And that's fine, right?
The contrarians among us.
Sure. Or, I mean, look, like if I was a fan, would I spend extra money for a new white coat? No, probably not. But would I also figure out a way to slap a poncho on or something white to fit in with all my brethren? Yeah, of course. You would try to make that $3 investment. If you're already making the investment to go to the whiteout game,
right?
Seems like a pretty easy bridge to cross.
Are there any other interesting observations, any other Nate Bauer level insights into this that we haven't talked about? I think we talked about kind of the main things from this particular conversation. And if you have any questions or comments in the chat, feel free to throw them in. If they're part of the conversation that can further our engagement here with the topic, we'll definitely put those up on screen. But Nate, is there anything from your perspective that we haven't talked about yet that you find interesting?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, like I think it would be... I'm curious to see when the actual TV partnership is announced on that, right? They didn't announce the time, right? Penn State simply put out its game themes for the season, for the home schedule for those 7 games. So they didn't actually formally announce that. I'll be interested to see how much time there is between now and when that is, kind of formally unveiled, because I think everything that I've seen thus far has been revealed by the networks themselves. Fox, right? I mean, if you look through that schedule there, T. Frank, there are not a lot of guarantees, right? It's West Virginia and Bowling Green are the two that have a secured time slot. Illinois, I think, has a few.
Yeah, 3:34 or 7:30, so it can start anywhere in like a 4-hour window.
Yeah. So it remains this interesting back dealing, right? There's a draft involved. Nobody's quite sure exactly how it works. I found it curious that Pat Kraft even said in that interview that part of this negotiation process for them was a learning process of how the television networks actually operate. I mean, they trade picks, right? Like it's an actual draft. So Fox has 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, and can trade the 8 pick for next year. all that stuff. So it's a very interesting methodology for how they figure all this stuff out.
So we'll just run this down for people listening on the podcast. If you are watching here on the YouTube channel, you can see it already. But here are the full game themes. September 7th, it's the Thon game. You have the Military Appreciation Day the next weekend. I'm sorry, there's a bye week in there. And then Military Appreciation Day is September 21st versus Kent State. Then you have September 28th, Homecoming against Illinois. Homecoming is typically Generations of Greatness as well, right? So that's when they'll wear their alternate uniforms. UCLA, the Stripe Out game. And then, of course, the Helmet Stripe game, which is the sneaky whiteout, as James Franklin has called it. Or somebody has referred it to him as that, and he agreed that it is kind of a sneaky whiteout versus Ohio State November 2nd. And then Senior Day, obviously, the last day of the year, or the last game of the year, November 30th against Maryland. Do these other stripe outs and helmet stripes, and do they lessen the whiteout in any way to you? I know we're talking about what people are wearing in the stands, but it is about like the spectacle. It is about the singularity of the one event. And when you're doing all these different themes, I don't know. I've always thought like they all kind of feel like plus ones in this conversation.
Maybe. I think that's fair, but I also think that anything that you can do as an organization to get people talking about the event, thinking about the event, and performing action on the event in advance of the event is a good thing. That's a good thing for your program, because all of the messaging, all of the stuff that starts really on Sunday, the week before, of hey, this is a stripe out game, right? What section are you sitting? Right now you're looking, now you're checking all that stuff out. You're trying to find out what how that impacts you, what section your seat's in, where are you the blue, are you the white, whatever it is. I do think that there is some value there in terms of setting the table early in the week of a sense of purpose and unity, right? I mean, I don't know, like some of this stuff sounds cheesy movie-esque, but add it all together cumulatively, yeah, I think it makes an impact. I think it creates a buzz that Penn State thrives on in a lot of ways.
It does matter when you're good. It does matter when you're having a really good season. And that's the next question. Are the Nittany Lions going to be any good? We're going to be previewing that right now with our training camp preview. Penn State gets going on
July 31st. July 31st.
July 31st. I almost said August 31st, but that's when the game is. That's when West Virginia is.
Very late. Yeah.
Whew, they would be completely unprepared. We're doing a training camp preview. There are 3 Wednesdays between now and the start of training camp. So we are going to be previewing the whole shebang here over the next couple of weeks, because Nate's going to be gone for a week. Fitz is gone this week. I want to make sure that we're covering our bases as we get into the real meat of what's happening, of Penn State's preparation for the 2024 season. So we're going to be playing a game of fill in the blank. And normally I have some fun graphics. I have all kinds of things, but today we're just doing it this way. Where I'm going to put this up on the screen, Nate, and you are going to give your comments, and I will fill in the blank, and people can play along in the chat or at home. So on offense, we're going to answer a couple of questions here. We're only getting to the offense today. So, Nate, blank needs to have a great training camp for the offense.
Yeah. I really went outside the box on this one. Drew Shelton.
You could have given a dramatic pause and just said Drew Shelton.
Yeah.
All right. Why?
Well, first of all, my expectation is that Drew Aller will have a great training camp. I think that he's locked in. He's ready. All of those elements seem to be in place for Penn State's starting quarterback. Yeah. Shelton, however, is a guy who hasn't played football in a really long time. Right? There's going to be some
Right.
rust there. There's going to be some. You just got to shake that stuff off. And I think that training camp provides him an opportunity. And look, it's not as though he's not working right now. He is. He has been back. He's been cleared for
Right.
what? I don't know, a month, maybe full go ish. But when you consider what that means, that he's been cleared full go for a month, that means
less.
that he wasn't cleared for 6 months.
Yeah.
Right?
It also means less for an offensive lineman to be cleared full go in July as opposed to April when there's contact and there's the ability to get in some significant work as a football player. Because, it's been a bit since he's been through that particular process. I also think it's very interesting when we have these conversations, especially about offensive linemen. And I remember having this conversation with you here on the show about Landon Tangwall when he was injured in an offseason and then had some complications. And I just had the question, how much work can he be getting to be the best version of himself in training camp and the season if you don't have those 6 months during the offseason to weight train, get stronger, and do the process in order? Because I don't think people understand when it comes to like doing it right in the weight room, it takes time. Most humans can only gain about 2 pounds of lean mass a week. And if you can maximize that through the course of an offseason, you can make some significant gains. I apologize. I think it's you lose 2 pounds of fat per week. It's less when it comes to lean muscle mass. So it is a long, slow process. And so if you're an offensive lineman who needs to gain a lot of muscle that you lost either through atrophy from injury or just the wear and tear of a season because you cannot be building and performing at the same time, how much can you be at your peak if you don't have that off season to develop? And I tried to ask Chuck Losey this one time, and he basically gave the answer of, I'm not going to answer that question. So I think it's very important that Drew Shelton has a great training camp to show he's on schedule, Nate, from a physical perspective and from a talent perspective, because last season we didn't see the best version of Drew Shelton. So you mentioned he hasn't played football in a long time. He hasn't played good football in quite a while because of whatever injury he had that he was playing through last year. So I guess, what is your projection for him? Do you think that this is a likelihood? Are you he's a big question mark, or do you think that it's not likely he has a great camp and solidifies that tackle position?
No, I think he will solidify the tackle position, no question. I think he will be the starting left tackle for this team this year. The heights, what's his ceiling? How good can he be? I think pretty good. I don't think that it's an overbearing concern over anything lingering. That's why you get surgery, right? That's why you take care of it, is to not have that linger. So I do think that he's in a position where he can have a good to great training camp. And I think that that's the expectation, right? I think that this is a program that understands that there are pieces on this offensive line that have shown enough to warrant confidence that they've demonstrated in games against Big Ten competition, against SEC competition. They have shown things that are worthy of optimism, but you gotta do it.
Got to put it all together.
You got to put it all together, and you got to do it over a whole season. And so I think that is a little bit of that's the proposition at stake right now for Penn State football on this offensive line is, the potential is there to be pretty good to great, but there's also the potential for that not to happen if lingering concerns, if things that were unresolved previously don't come to fruition.
I'm gonna be I'm gonna throw one out here. It's not my answer because Drew Shelton is the answer as the starting left tackle. Very important. But JB Nelson needs to have a great camp as well. I think for him personally, and for the conversation that we have about the depth of the interior of the offensive line and the flexibility he provides as that swing tackle, that his status has been more volatile than Shelton's over the last several seasons. So not the receiver position. Nobody comes up in that conversation here in the training camp conversation with our first question. Let's move on to the next one. Penn State offense. The Penn State offense will be ready for week 1 against West Virginia if blank happens.
I really struggled with this too, Frank. So I'm hoping you'll give me, what do you think? Because I'll tell you what I think, but I was just curious where your head was when you put this question down.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm thinking is they're installing a new scheme, right? And we've seen before really talented offenses don't click out of the box. This has a 2016 vibe of they're going to face a competent opponent in the first month of the season, and if they aren't to a certain level of cohesion and understanding of the scheme and understanding of each other, continuity on the offensive line, etc., then they have the opportunity to drop a game against West Virginia, where I think that they're pretty clearly the better team, because that's kind of how football goes sometimes. So in those factors of offensive line gelling together, the receivers understanding their assignments, Drew Aller understanding the offense, Drew Aller finally putting it all together. What's the thing that needs to happen during training camp so that they come out of the gates with enough juice to get past a West Virginia team that is a good team?
Okay, so this kind of aligns in that I think that everybody needs to be healthy. And that's a stupid thing to say. I get it. But I think they can't sustain a loss of a starter at really on the offensive line, but particularly I'm thinking of all the obvious suspects. Right? Trey Wallace has to be good. Tyler Warren. I mean, and I'm not saying that any of those guys are hurt right now. They're not, but I'm saying you got to be able to get through training camp with those pieces, because I think that that's the biggest part of that conversation about these two teams is if Penn State has its best players, it should be able to win that game based on its best players doing the things that those players do. They shouldn't have to have an overly complex schematic approach to that game to beat West Virginia. It is a classic strength versus strength and weakness versus weakness, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that anybody's looking at West Virginia's defense this season thinking that they're going to be lights out. There's a lot of questions to that defense. And certainly I have more to learn about them before diving in too deeply. But if the thinking right now is, yeah, if Penn State gets the ball into Nick Singleton's hands in space, should have success.
Yeah.
Right. If Drew Aller doesn't throw interceptions in that game, they should have success. Trey Wallace makes some plays. All of those high expectations pieces that Penn State has, if they're healthy, if they get through preseason camp, good. They should be in a pretty good position to compete in that game.
Beach Wine Guy has his answers here in the chat. We'll see how they line up with Nate's. He says the wide receivers need to have a great training camp. The Penn State offense will be ready for week 1 against West Virginia if evolution happens. He says after an offseason of talk, Drew Aller emerges as the team leader on offense, and the wide receiver room takes the biggest step in August. So wide receivers under the microscope. So Nate, we're going to get into the final 2 questions here. Question number 3, after an offseason of talk, blank emerges as a team leader on offense.
It's true. It's true. It has to be Drew.
Drew Shelton.
No.
Sorry.
No.
I'm playing defense against a good show today. Clearly.
I know. It look, we have had this conversation. We can continue to have this conversation. I think that it's what he wants. I think Drew Aller wants to be that type of leader. I think Penn State wants that of him. I think his teammates want that of him. All of those wants are in place. It's simply a matter of execution. And again, as a middle-aged overweight guy sitting on the sideline, it's like super easy to talk about as though I have any idea. I don't. I don't know all of the things that go into having charisma with teammates and demanding a standard that gets the best out of people, right? I mean, that's the whole thing for him is, yes, he has a best that I don't think any of us have really seen so far that needs help from the players around him. But inversely, he also, through his performance, needs to unlock the best out of all of those pieces, because that's kind of the reality of what we're talking about with this team this year is Nick Singleton doesn't need a ton of help. Katron Allen doesn't need a ton of help. Trey Wallace doesn't need a ton of help. If those guys are doing what they do, Tyler Warren, if those guys are doing what they do, Omari Evans, right? Like if they are doing what they do and Drew simply performs and complements that exceptional talent that those guys have, Penn State should have a very good season this year. And Andy Kotelnicki is a massive, he's a puppeteer in all of that. But if those things work together, I just go back to what James Franklin said in the spring about the receivers. They have talent. They can catch the ball. They can run. They can do things that are exceptional in certain ways, but they've got to do it consistently, and this is the year to prove it.
So it's interesting. I've been going through in my mind the offense and trying to kind of single out like who benefits the most from Andy Kotelnicki's scheme. And Nate, I keep coming back to everyone, all of them, because I can give you specific answers why the offensive line was put in a bad position last year, where it was basically like the offensive scheme leaned on them to be perfect because there was not a whole lot of there were things done from a schematic standpoint that were like tricky, right? That like, oh, we're going to do something that you don't expect. We're going to run from this formation to the left side of the offensive line instead of the right side of the offensive line. Instead of like, hey, we're going to run outside zone with action pulling defenders out of the box, or except whatever thing that Andy Kotelnicki does that creates positive angles for the offensive line to get to the second level or to get to their block. Where these guys should, as long as they execute properly, and Nick Dawkins talked to Sean Fitz, that article at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Great conversation about the understanding the scheme, being on point, understanding how to work together from the offensive line perspective. They might benefit the most from Andy Kotelnicki. But then we talk about the receivers and how they've been bagged on for 8 months. And getting them open with proper spacing, matchups, again, angles, opening up zones with different things. They could have, again, the preview that I wrote yesterday of open targets that they got last year versus the ones that Andy Kotelnicki got and manufactured for his offense at Kansas is like per capita and quality. Like he got more explosive opportunities for the Kansas offense that generated big plays than Penn State was able to get in their offense. And then you talk about the quarterback, the synergy of all of that, and Nick Singleton, like getting running lanes for Nick Singleton. Nate, we've talked about this. Get him on train tracks and let him run fast. Devin Neal at Kansas, I was listening to a podcast the other day. He is a guy that people are talking about as a first-round pick, partly because he's got the talent, partly because Andy Kotelnicki put him in position to be a star. Like those are you could go through. Tyler Warren is going to be featured in the offense. All of these players have the stand to benefit from this particular scheme as long as they all can get on the same page and operate it correctly. So now that I'm done filibustering, last question. The blank room is the position that needs to take the biggest step in August.
Yeah, it's receiver. It is.
All right.
You just anything else is disingenuous, right? I don't think anyone would say. I mean, the running backs are probably the best unit if not the team, then certainly the offense. I think that much is clear. The tight ends are there. Quarterback, I think you could make maybe a little bit of a conversation. The offensive line, has big strides to make in terms of cohesion with 3 starters absent from last year's team. But end of the day, this offense is going to be predicated on whether or not those receivers step up, and those receivers, it's not just August. It's need to take the biggest step from January to August.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, and I think your answer is correct, but people always want to know more. So if you had to pick one receiver who needs to take that step, who needs to evolve from a guy that has the talent to a guy who can do it, which receiver do you think it is?
Omari Evans.
Why? I mean, I agree. I know why, but why?
He's super, super fast. He's really fast, and that changes things. It changes things for the offensive coordinator. It changes things for opponents' defensive coordinator. It changes things for the back end of the defense. It changes things. And so if Omari can harness his talent as a very fast human being and turn that quickness into a well-rounded receiver who can, like, you can't just burn people. You have to catch it occasionally at the end of that burn. And so he's got it, and it can't just be that he's only a deep threat too.
Right.
He has to be a well-rounded receiver, but he has this opportunity to fundamentally change how everything looks for Penn State. Right? How it looks for Drew Aller, how it looks for Nick Singleton, how it looks for Katron Allen, right? All of these different pieces. If Omari Evans can make that progress, if he can become that guy, I think it really does. It just radically changes what the potential is, what the high end ceiling is for this Penn State offense this season.
I think from a talent perspective, you've mentioned Penn State. The receiver room is worse off without Keandre Lambert-Smith there from a talent perspective, from an ability perspective. Omari Evans is the one guy who can replicate some of that threat. The second thing that I was interested in, I don't remember who said it to you, or if it indeed was to you, because you talked to so many people in June and July. I think it was Drew Aller was talking to you about Omari Evans, where he said he's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's physical. Was that the conversation? Can you just kind of retell how the context of that? Because I've always felt that about Omari when he's got, like, he plays and fights, but he hasn't had the tools to unlock all of those skills because he just kind of gets shovey. You know, we saw that a couple of times in a couple of games. So I guess what was the context of the conversation around Omari Evans with that particular comment?
Yeah, just that he won. The quote that stood out was he can run whatever 40 he wants, meaning he's as fast as you can be, right? Like he's just super fast. He's one of the fastest guys on the team. And that counts for something at this level. That is a difference maker. You can separate yourself with that speed, but he has had, I think the way that Allard described it is that he has had trouble kind of making that transition into that consistency of being that every down receiver, of having all of the tools, of not getting down on himself. I think that that's part of it, is the frustration that emerges when you don't make the progress that you think you should be making. But the key to all of this, in my mind, is what you just said about Keandre. Keandre is not there. The door is open. Right? You've got this huge window, this huge door that is there for Omari to walk through and create what he has envisioned for himself, but hasn't come to fruition yet in his career. That is there for him this season for the taking, if he can make those strides.
We have a great mailbag section with some good questions that we're going to spend a little bit of time on. If you got any questions, drop them in the chat now, because we are here. We are now into my favorite part of the show where we get to answer your questions and you get to ask the things you want to know in the BWI mailbag. So our first question today is a what if from Poncho 570. He says, a game of what if. What if Julian Fleming and Nolan Ritchie came to Penn State from the get-go? Where would they be in their development as players? What would be the effects of the players currently or no longer on the roster? Or generally, what do you think of this situation if both of those 5-star players from Pennsylvania had chosen the Nittany Lions originally instead of going elsewhere? Nate, a lot of different ways to go with this. What jumps to your mind initially?
That's tough. That is tough. I think it is. Well, first of all, they play different positions, so that's your first challenge. Is Nolan Ritchie beating out Caden Wallace or Olu Fashanu either of the past 3 years? No. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, right? Like T. Frank,
No.
I don't
No.
No. So
I think that it would have the biggest difference on this year specifically, where you have Caden Wallace. Oh, here's how I would phrase this. Caden Wallace, we had the conversation about him as a guy who had all the talent in the world, but seemed like he needed to be pushed a little bit. And when Drew Shelton came along, finally his last year, he put it all together and had a really good year as a tackle. If you've got Nolan Ritchie from the class of 2021, does that change the trajectory of Caden Wallace? And then secondarily, I guess the thing I would say with Ritchie is you would feel very different about this year, 2024, if Nolan Ritchie had been in the program for as long as he has and would be, I think, a more comfortable step into the role as opposed to, I don't think we say this enough, Anthony Donko is a redshirt freshman who they are expecting to step in and man a tackle position and is on trajectory to be the best offensive lineman on the team from a production standpoint with his talent and what the curve looks like on his development. That is still an absolute speculation. So if you had Ritchie, you might have a different battle, and you might have more of that ascension. We also might not have the conversation about Drew Shelton, where everyone kind of is looking with side eyes at Drew Shelton of, okay, there's another wild card on the team. Did Drew Shelton have to play initially as a freshman? Did he have to play last year while injured? These are the conversations, I guess, from a depth perspective. It's all about depth. It's not necessarily about changing the starting lineup to me. I think it's more about what is the effect of depth at tackle on Penn State's roster, because Nate, they haven't had depth ever at that position.
Yep. No, I agree. He's also a little bit different from. I see Fleming as to Penn State's benefit. I mean, certainly it hasn't been to Penn State's benefit that they haven't had some of what he delivers. Right? They very much could have used more enthusiastic and willing blocking receivers over the past couple of years, right? Like that would have made, specifically last year, that would have been very big for Penn State, because that was at times one of the big issues that they had in the running game.
Yeah.
I think that the fifth year element brings a desperation is the wrong word, but urgency for sure.
Yeah.
When the clock runs out and he has not, I feel like we've had this conversation where I'm subtly tempering expectations for him.
Yeah.
And a lot of Penn State fans who haven't been really paying attention to his career are remembering 5 stars and he's coming to Penn State, and he was of course he was buried at Ohio State. You're dealing with 2 top 10 picks, right? On among those receivers.
3.
He still started. But I think look, there's no way that anyone would say, based on what his expectations were coming out of high school, that his career has gone as planned. That's why he's at Penn State this year.
Yep.
Is to maximize this, to have, again, just like I was talking about Omari, to have this open opportunity and to step through it and produce the types of numbers, to stay healthy, to do all of the things that haven't really happened for him with consistency through his career at Ohio State. He gets that chance now, and it's on a 1-year deal. So if that's the guy he wants to be, if that's the guy he can become, we'll do it.
To me, the question is, Nate, do you believe in fate and predestination when it comes to Nolan Rucci? And I say that in a way to make you laugh, but that's the question. Do you believe that his injuries were predestined? Because that's the conversation with Nolan Rucci, or excuse me, with Julian Fleming, because those have had a serious effect on his abilities, his physical abilities, from what I understand. Not that he was ever going to be a superstar speed receiver, but if you are trying to overcome that and you lose that incrementally over time, then you're in a real pickle. So if he came to Penn State originally with the strength and conditioning program, would fate have smiled more kindly on him? And I think that is something that nobody knows. Nobody can know that. If there's a higher power, that's the being that understands that. Outside of that, we're all guessing. But yeah, I think that there would be conversations about leadership and maturity, but then how much leadership and maturity does he gain at Penn State, and how much did he learn at Ohio State? Like, those are some of the things we can't know.
And it's the same Caden Wallace conversation to a certain extent, is how would things have been? Again, I mean, you can see this line of demarcation post Parker Washington.
Yeah.
That okay, Parker was there and Mitch Tinsley, and after that, there was a vacuum that Keandre was expected to step into, and in some ways did. But I mean, look, like, Keandre still had over 50 catches last year.
He had 85 targets.
Yeah, like I just keep thinking that people are, maybe underplaying what the impact is there. The productivity that he had. He was productive.
And he could have been more productive if there had been better play in certain positions from the first-year starting quarterback.
Yeah.
There also could have been better play from him in a bunch of other situations. So, like, yeah. Nate, that is going to be a conversation and a show that we could do some other time when discussing the merits of his 85 targets and however many catches he got last year. Let's go on to the next question from Kobe King, from David WG about Kobe King. He says, is Kobe King the most underrated Nittany Lion entering 2024? Feels like he's primed for an excellent season in year 4. I have some thoughts. I can go first, but I always like to give the guest of the show, the star of the show, the opportunity to respond to the question and have the correctest answer. So what do you think?
It's a good question. I think he's kind of underrated. He's not in the consciousness that maybe he should be. I think he should, like, to me, if I think about underrated, I think Jalen Reed. I don't think anybody appreciates how good he is and how important he is to this defense this season. But I could throw out some defensive tackle names that probably would be in the conversation there that are not at the forefront of the conversation. But yeah, Kobe's in there for sure, and he's very clearly demonstrated himself just think about the conversation that everyone was having 2 years ago going into the preseason of Tyler Elsdon and Kobe King. It was right. Kobe needed to make up ground because Tyler Elsdon knew where to be, when to be there, right? He understood, he got it a little bit better because he was on a 1 year. He had a 1 year head start, right? And that helped him. But very clearly, Kobe has passed Tyler, and I don't want this to turn into like slamming Tyler Elsdon. Tyler Elsdon's going to be big part of this defense this year. He will continue to provide help there, as Kobe's reserve. But Kobe King is, he's a guy that's going to be there in the middle, and he's going to be important to what they do.
I go back and forth on this, Nate. I'm not going to get into the Kobe King, Tyler Elston thing because that's probably not productive. I think Kobe King is a great answer. I think your point of Jalen Reed and his impact on the defense is also really important. But if it weren't for Abdul Carter changing positions, we'd be talking way more about Amin Vanover. We should be talking way more about Amin Vanover. He has been one of the most effective defensive ends, I keep using this, per capita, on the team over the last 2 years. He never has had a full starters quality amount of reps, but when he's on the field, the data says he is one of the most disruptive defensive linemen on the team. And that is on par with Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac in terms of disruptive plays, tackles for loss, pressures, immediate wins, big, quick wins, all of those things that matter when it comes to defensive line play. He's really good at shedding blocks and blowing up the plan for the offense. But because we're talking about Abdul Carter transitioning to defensive end, everyone assumes Abdul is the de facto starter. Now, I have been, your Julian Fleming is my Abdul Carter of let's just let him play football first before we anoint him. I understand he is a super athlete. And I've said this offseason, I know I'm in shut up nerd territory. That's fine. But I also think that there are things that need to happen before he turns into Micah Parsons the way everyone thinks he's going to. So like there's a line there of to me, Amin has done it. I have seen him do it. I'm excited to see him do it in a more full-time role, but we're talking about Abdul Carter.
Yeah. I think there is an opportunity for everyone to have success under and have stats but look, like to your point, sometimes it sounds like we're, coming in with like a hot take. Deion Barnes would say the same thing that you just said. He has said the same thing that you just said, not specifically about Amin's relation to Abdul Carter, but pumping the brakes on Abdul Carter. Hey, let's keep things one day at a time for Abdul Carter and allow him to go through the development that has to occur. Taking on a new position, like that's hard.
Yes.
It's hard stuff. And he's tremendous, fabulously talented, and he will have a great season. There's no question in my mind that he's going to have a great year this year. But I bet you there's going to be some games at the beginning of the year where people say, "Oh, how come Abdul?" I mean, what was it? Wasn't it last year that Chop didn't have a sack right away? Or these storylines get fogged in my head at this point. But sometimes when the stats aren't there right away, people think, "Oh, they're not as productive, or they're not doing
sacks are overrated." Yes,
sacks are right. Like all of that stuff. I do think that Abdul is going to have some growing pains. There's going to be some stuff there for him to get better. And like you said, Deion Barnes won't hesitate to use those guys. I mean, Vanover, Smith Vilbert is going to get some play there, right? You'll just have to see. You'll just have to see how that goes.
And I do think that there is a world where they still use Abdul the same way, where he's a movable chess piece and he's still getting, like, maybe he plays defensive end on base rundowns, but on third down, he's still rushing over the A gap, and suddenly he's still getting those matchups against running backs and destroying people and getting those flash plays. And so the development doesn't have to take place because you have guys that can rush from the edge. You have guys that can do that, and he can still be that wild card on the defensive front. So we could all be right, Nate, and no one will see it that way, but we could all still be right about that. Speaking of defensive ends, speaking of Chop Robinson, speaking of recruiting now, Blackheart 8541 says, out of the current 2025 defensive end commits, who do you think has the most potential or highest ceiling? I'm going to not put Deshaun Burnett and LeVar Arrington II in this conversation because then we would have 5. I also think it's pretty simple, Nate. Max Granville, I just did a breakdown of his game, one of his high school football games, over on the Blue White Illustrated message board, where I go through, I find a YouTube video that we all can watch. I put it on there, and I go through, and I say, like, I break down plays that are relevant, why they're relevant, what he shows on those plays. And to me, Max Granville Whoa. Just wow. For a guy, and we throw the term out undersized a lot. He can be 225 or 255. He can be the same size as Chop Robinson. But the violence with which he plays and the strength in his hands, his ability to use power and speed together, is better than most of the defensive ends that I've seen coming out of high school, where he understands how to use leverage, and he doesn't have the longest arms in the world, but he knows how to get quickly into the chest of an offensive lineman and shock them and then disengage. As long as he learns to work with his hands through the rest of the rep, he can be a guy that does it all. I talked to Landon Tangwall about this on his show where we broke down Abdul Carter. We've had this conversation. I think Abdul can be that guy too, where he could be a complete defensive end that uses speed to power. He's got the size. He's got the violence in him. He's got the power. He just needs to learn how to do those things. Max Granville, his dad's an NFL offensive lineman or defensive lineman. He knows how to do those things right now. He can set up tackles, go inside, go outside, go through them. I'm very high on Max Granville. And shocker, he's one of the best players in Penn State's class, and you're really high on him. But there's a lot of times where, kind of there was nuance to Denied and a Sutton, where he's going to be a very specific defensive end. There's no nuance here. He's just awesome. And I think I'm very excited to watch Max Granville play, because I'm always wanting to see something I haven't seen before in a Penn State uniform, something I haven't evaluated on a weekly basis. Chop Robinson was the best speed athlete at that position. He's the best speed rusher I've seen with the Nittany Lions, from the defensive end position. Micah Parsons, best athlete, best overall football player, sure. But Chop at the position was better at getting to the quarterback with his tools. Max Granville has more right now than Chop displayed. We'll see where it goes. We'll see if all those things line up. I'm just going to move on because I'm assuming you have deep thoughts about defensive end recruit.
I believe you.
Okay, so Philip in the Valley, this one might be one I answer to here at the end. He said, in light of Fitz's story about the offensive line, what can we expect different from a scheme perspective from the offensive line and Andy Kotelnicki's offense? So if you haven't read it, go read Sean Fitz's article. It was an interview he did with Nick Dawkins, where he talked to him about leadership and all those things we've talked about, getting the offensive line on the same page. To me, Nate, the conversation was about the freshmen. It was about making sure the freshmen are on the same page and they understand the playbook, not necessarily that there's going to be these massive changes that cause the offense to have to relearn a bunch of different things. I do think that there are some changes. There will be things that from a technique perspective or from a style perspective that they have to get on the same page. But from a playbook perspective, James Franklin has talked about this. Largely from a play perspective, from what are we running? They're running the same thing. And the point of this offseason was not only are we running the same thing, we're going to call it the same thing so that you don't get confused. And just getting the freshmen on board who weren't here last year, that don't have that context, they understand what the hell everyone's talking about when it's called in the huddle. From that just broad perspective, I do want to get your final thoughts here on the show, on this question, and then get us out of here. What do you expect from the offense? Because this is the most critical thing to me. Do you expect the offense to be harmonious by the first game of the season, or good enough to get through that first month where they are a cohesive unit?
Just being realistic, I think there's going to be some growing pains for sure. Harmonious, yeah. I don't know. Look, is this something where I think Penn State is going to come out and drop 55 at West Virginia? No, I don't expect that. I think that Penn State's defense will continue to be good, and that Penn State won't have that mindset necessarily in that game. I don't anticipate them playing that way and taking that approach from the start. I do think this is what's going to be very interesting to me is how much of last year's, hey, you only have to do so much here, don't mess it up, carries over from last year to this year, because it was a big, I think that it's a fair point to say that it burned them
Yes.
when they needed it.
Yes. You cannot, I personally believe you cannot be an offense and have that mentality. You cannot play conservative and dictate to the opposing defense at the same time. Playing to your defense, the way I said it last year is, if you're going to go full Iowa, you have to go full Iowa. That means punt when it's obscure. That means kick only field goals. That means be so conservative that it is maddening to watch. And Penn State couldn't go full Iowa from a schematic perspective or from a decision-making perspective. And if they tried to do that again, like the point of Andy Nittany being here is that so they can be ground and pound, play to the defense a little bit better, but also be explosive. So I agree. If they have that mentality, that's a recipe for disaster again.
Yeah, and I don't think they will, but I do think there will be a ramping up process to it. Yeah. I don't think it's a coincidence that James Franklin brought up Joe Moorhead in his interview this summer with me, like specifically, and he named Joe Moorhead. Well, if you're saying that you're incorporating elements of what Joe Moorhead did, 8 years ago, whatever it was, then there's going to be that flair. There's going to be some of that to this. There's going to be some of that taking it. Andy Nittany talked about it, about taking it to defenses. So
yep.
We'll see. We'll see what happens.
It'll be fun. All that's going to happen here in a couple of weeks. They're going to start on that process. Subscribe to Blue White Illustrated so you don't miss any of that. If you're watching the video at this point, please like the video, subscribe here to the YouTube channel. We'll be back. We're back up and running. We're going to have the full slate of everything you expect from the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel now that I'm back sutured into this seat. We'll be back tomorrow with more at 10 a.m. We'll talk to you then.